from the Ra and Cassiopeian communications, as well as Barbara Marciniak's Bringers of the Dawn channeled communications. We also get a profound insight that there is no need for punishment or demands to do this or that to get on the good side of some higher being or God. There is only your free will, which is limited by your understanding and level of being, and your growth and development, which form your lessons. Now, in my own case, I could have totally been turned off by all of this channeling business, and without an open mind, just left the Cassiopeia website, and that would be that. But for several years, I had been using the I Ching, also known as the Book of Changes, the ancient Chinese system of knowledge, to ask difficult questions that I was not able to answer with my own conscious mind, with my own resources and capacities. And I had in many cases received quite uncanny and relevant answers to my queries. I had also noticed a pattern. Whenever I had an open, sincere approach to a question, I got clear indications of where the crux of the matter really lies, a more or less easy to interpret answer to my difficult problems. Whenever I was anxious to get a certain kind of answer or indication, had too much anticipation, I got confusing, difficult to interpret answers. And sometimes, only much later, I would see what the I Ching was trying to tell me about a situation. Speaking of patterns, by the way, that is how I found the Cassiopeia website in the first place. After struggling for years with all sorts of everyday human problems, I had noticed certain repeating patterns and cycles, if you will. And after a particularly difficult period of several years, sort of being at the end of my wits, I did a search on the internet for patterns and cycles. I don't remember all the details, but after going through a whole bunch of search results, reading some web pages, bookmarking to come back if I felt the need, from one of the sites, many of which were linked to each other, I clicked on a Cassiopeia link. After several days of reading the other search results, I had a strange feeling. Most of the information only somewhat resonated with me, so to speak, but there was an increasing excitement and almost joy leading up to the Cassiopeia find. Again, I don't remember all the details, but much of the other information was typical COINTELPRO type disinformation and misinformation, such as the human potential and noetic sciences stuff a la Tom Bearden, HARP and weather control as a weapon, all from, if I remember correctly, holographic patterns, etc. That is to say, the typical methods of mixing some truth with lies and half-truths to vector people away from dangerous truths, so to speak. Of course, I later learned much more about HARP and mind control, about which I highly recommend you search for articles both on the forums and the news pages, etc., about this topic, along with cell phones and cell phone towers, and contrails and chemtrails from the SOT.net and related sites, but more on that later. By the way, HARP stands for the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program and is run out of Alaska, directed at the manipulation of the properties of the Earth's ionosphere for applications of mind and behavior alteration. But of course, there's lots of disinformation about it, even when it's cast in the light of it being nefarious, and it takes a research network like SOT to get to the bottom of it. When I finally got to Cassiopeia, read the introduction and the Cassiopeian experiment material, and started reading the Adventures with Cassiopeia series, all this material really began to resonate strongly with me. I started to devour the material every free moment of my waking hours. I followed up with reading the Wave series of articles, and just continued finding and reading articles and discussions on these sites, and never looked back. These two works are highly recommended. Entirely new vistas of investigation and thought will open up to the patient, open-minded seeker of knowledge and understanding. Talking about devouring the material, This could become a problem, in my opinion, so be cautious about it becoming an obsession and putting you in the wrong state. Not a sharp critical thinking state, and also not an open but constricted state, so to speak. You may end up jumping to wrong conclusions, making broad assumptions, and generally not having the proper understanding and making wrong connections, all leading to creating new belief systems, not based on what was said, in what context, but based on your own biases. Remember, what sets this group apart in every way, the Cassiopeia transmissions and everything else, is that we are not asked to believe anything, but to test, research, discuss, research some more, and test again. In fact, this is the distinguishing mark of the SOT Research Network. No sacred cows, no beliefs not supported by the available evidence. In fact, the Cassiopeia transmissions are totally unique in that nothing is taken at face value. Nothing is to be believed, whether because the Cassiopeians said so or for any other reason. And the Cassiopeians themselves stress the importance of this and warn against the human tendency to deify them, emphasizing the equal importance of the group in the interactions and communications with these unified thought forms as they've described themselves. The Cassiopeia experiment is more an inspiration for directions of research and verification than anything else. And what has been verified and can be verified from the communications so far has an amazing track record. These communicants, calling themselves the Cassiopeians, told Laura, "We are you in the future as you perceive time." There are different interpretations that can be made as to what exactly that means, and there is no final decision by the Quantum Future Group as to the meaning. They said that they are service to others, beings from sixth density. Also, like the raw law of one and bringers of the dawn material, the Cassiopeian communications, in their cosmology, say 7 levels of density exist in the macrocosmos, and beings occupy the density that accords to their awareness and level of consciousness. For example, humans are 3rd density, and they say we were at one time aligned with 4th density STO, which has come down through the millennia in the legend of Eden and other similar legends. And then at some point we became aligned with 4th density STS, extremely powerful beings above our own level, who dominate us, as we now dominate 2nd density, the plant and animal realm. They say this realignment and falling under the domination of 4th density service to self beings occurred about 310,000 years ago as we experience and measure time, at what they call the closing/beginning of the grand cycle, and has been symbolized by the legend of the fall of Adam and Eve and other similar legends. And they also say 7th density is the One, the source from which all comes and to which all returns, probably what's commonly called God by humans. The raw and bringers of the dawn material also mention this idea of a grand cycle, although the raw material has a different length of time indicated. Also, the fourth way teachings as disseminated by Gurdjieff and his students, and also Boris Moraviev, present a 7 density cosmology as well. By the way, some really good books to read on the fourth way teachings are In Search of the Miraculous, Fragments of an Unknown Teaching by Gurdjieff's student, P.D. Uspensky, and Moraviev's 3-volume Gnosis. Uspensky's book Tertium Organum is also a fascinating exploration of extra dimensions and how, quote, lower worlds, unquote, with less dimensions would experience phenomena coming from higher worlds with access to more dimensions. So, this structure of the macrocosmos with 7 levels of being agrees pretty closely with fourth way esoteric teachings, which have come down through many, many thousands of years in different guises, such as ancient shamanism, ancient and medieval alchemy, as well as the movements that culminated in Catharism in medieval Europe and the Sufi teachings of Ibn al-Arabi, etc. The theoretical framework and working hypothesis of the quantum future group, which includes a cosmology with the structure of the cosmos having 7 densities, which as mentioned is also the cosmology of the fourth way, posits that these densities are actually represented by frequencies of waves that correspond to consciousness. The higher the density of vibrations depicted as frequencies on a graph, the lower the density of what we know as matter. So the higher level of density, just as in the fourth way teachings, refers to the density of frequency of vibrations, not density in the sense commonly used in chemistry and physics, referring to the amount of mass in a certain amount of volume, but is rather in reverse proportion to that type of material density. In this working hypothesis, or theoretical framework, there are 3 physical densities, densities 1 through 3, 3 ethereal densities, 5 through 7, and a paraphysical density, which is density 4, where physicality is variable, selective, and much less restrictive. Service to self and service to others consciousness patterns are also differentiated and represent differing frequencies in the interactions of these 2 patterns. Although eternally in opposition, are balanced in the macrocosmos, and their interaction manifests in all things in existence. Service to self manifests constriction, control, exclusivity, domination, deceit, and destructive principles. And service to others manifests expansion, free will and its preservation, cooperation and collaboration, giving all to those who ask, inclusiveness and creative principles. Ultimately, they are 2 diametrically opposed views of existence. STS sees and interprets the principle that ultimately all is one by forcing or attempting to force all to serve self and thereby serving others, since all are at a certain level one. STO sees and interprets the principle that ultimately all is one by serving all others and thereby serving self through serving others. And their interaction and distinct roles combine into a third reconciling force from which all creation comes into being and cycles endlessly. So this is kind of like a theoretical framework of existence within which the research is being conducted. This concept of the third force is a very important aspect of the fourth way system and is widely discussed on the forum. In fact, in the fourth way, it is often said that humans are currently third force blind and tend to only see the 2 forces, positive and negative, a duality. These 3 forces are variously described in the fourth way literature as negative, positive, and neutralizing, or active, passive, and reconciling. As the QFG research has discovered, the symbols of STS are the triangle and the pyramid, which symbolize the domination hierarchy, with few at the top and many at the bottom. The symbols of STO are the circle, the sphere, and the spiral, which symbolize the circulation of energy to all, symbolically equally distributed. Hence, by giving energy, the creative energy circulates and returns. Interestingly, there are very ancient archaeological records of civilizations that built megalithic pyramids and those that built megalithic circular and spiral structures. There is an enormous amount of information about all of this in Laura Knight-Jadczyk's work, including her books, High Strangeness, Hyperdimensions, and the Process of Alien Abduction, and The Secret History of the World. Those with the curiosity and willingness to look closer at the large amount of material meticulously researched, collected, and analyzed by Laura are encouraged to do so, as the scope of this film essay is quite limited.